Welcome back. It's great to have you with us on The Full View on SABC News. Now, have South African government workers become moonlighting mad? A report about work on the side, as it were, has raised serious questions about the state of the public service. Stats released by the Public Service Commission, which of course investigates and monitors civil servants, shows that effectively, listen to this, 1 in every 3 senior civil servants across national and provincial departments are flouting the rules. They are meant to declare directorships and other business interests to limit conflicts of interest if their business and their state work conflict, of course. Well, to discuss, we're now joined by the Public Service Commission's Michael Seloane. He's with us from our studio in Pretoria. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Seloane. It sounds like everyone, not everyone, but the majority here, moonlighting and making millions. Now, that is not necessarily wrong if they disclose and there's no conflict, but does it suggest a culture within our public service?
Good evening, and good evening to the listeners. With respect to the issue of civil servants performing remunerated work outside the public service, the regulations are saying that they must get permission, and if they don't get permission, then they are guilty of misconduct, and they must account for that. So basically, there is nothing wrong in them conducting remunerative work outside public service when they have permission. However, what the regulations do not cover is that when a person does work outside the public service, so part of his concentration will be on the work that he's going to do outside the public service, and might impact negatively on the work that he's paid for in the public service. And that will cause the supervisors of that person to work very hard to monitor this public servant, because there is a risk that the resources of state might be used for this other work which is outside the public service. So it is important that it must be regulated properly and dealt with properly and managed by the supervisors in such a way that there is optimal use of the resources in the department.
Well, it seems like it's not being managed. 43% of all senior civil servants failed to disclose their business interests, according to your stats, including 8 director generals. Now, they basically run government departments. The majority of public servants on the ground did not gain the approval required for paid work. How is this all allowed to happen?
The regulations are saying that every year all senior managers must disclose their interests. If they don't, then they are guilty of misconduct, and therefore, as the Public Service Commission, we advise executive authorities, that is ministers and MECs in the provinces, to take disciplinary steps against those who have not disclosed their interests. But if they've disclosed their interests, it does not necessarily mean that there will not be any conflict of interest. Because in terms of the circular that was published in January last year, the directive by the Minister of Public Service Administration, which deals with conducting business with the state, it has been observed that some of the officials who have companies, those companies are registered on the central supplier database. And that registration means there is an intention to conduct business with the state. So that is not acceptable, and it will be in violation of the directive, which is in terms of the public service regulations.
But I'm saying how are they getting away with this? How is it happening that they're allowed to do this? I mean, 8 director generals, that is serious, and the ministers are in charge there. Is there just no political will to clamp down on people who don't disclose?
They are doing that. If they do that, and in violation of the in violation of the public service regulations, it is the responsibility of the minister to institute disciplinary actions, because our governance arrangements is such a way that the executive authority vests with the minister responsible, and the minister is the one who is supposed to take action. So as the Public Service Commission, we recommend that action be taken, and then within 60 days that they must give us the report on how they've dealt with that matter, and give us the actions that they have taken. And if they've taken no action at all, we as the Public Service Commission, we still have the right to put it into the report and table it in Parliament, so that the portfolio committees, relevant portfolio committees, can then ask the minister to account why is the minister not taking action in relation to the recommendations coming from the Public Service Commission. So there are checks and balances to ensure that it happens. And if it doesn't happen, we still have we can even report to the president to indicate that officials are not being disciplined in accordance with the regulations.
Okay, so you're putting real pressure on this time. It seems that we've got to a point where public service officials feel they can do anything. Is it going to become harder to do that in the future if you do put that pressure on? And I see that there are at least links, closer links with CIPRO. So you're seeing very easily via computer systems who has directorships, who has business interests, where and how. Is that going to make it much harder for people to get away with this in future?
Yeah, definitely there's no way to get away. So first is that they must submit their disclosure forms. Senior managers submit to the head of department, and the head of department submit to the executive authority, which is the minister or the MEC. And the minister and the MEC must submit those to the PSC, and the PSC scrutinizes all the forms. In the last financial year, we scrutinized all the forms. And out of those forms, the report that you have indicates that 721 did not disclose the companies that they are involved in. And the risk is that some of those companies which have not been disclosed may be on the central supplier database, and that means there may be an intention to conduct business with the state. And the civil servants, senior civil servants, are the custodians of the resources of government. And as a result, they have to behave in an ethical way, honestly, so that the public has confidence in them to manage their resources. And if they don't declare, it means that the public will not have confidence in them because they are a bit dishonest. So those are the issues that needs to be addressed, and we make sure that through CIPRO, through DITS register, through the central supply database, we are able to detect those officials who are involved in any conflict of interest. So our work is to determine that and advise the ministers accordingly. So unfortunately, the Public Service Commission can only recommend or advise ministers, but cannot take action, unlike the Public Service Commission before 1994, which was the employer of public servants and could take that action. So the employer at the moment is the ministers and the MECs in the provinces. All
right, so please continue to put pressure on the ministers. The final question would be, as taxpayers, how concerned should we be that there isn't that ethical practice, that nearly half of all civil servants are trying to hide their business interests, maybe trying to navigate the system, maybe just trying to make money?
Taxpayers should not keep quiet. When the report like this one comes out, first is to watch what ministers are doing, and also asking ministers to account on that, because our governance arrangement, again, the legislature is accountable to the people, and the cabinet or the executive is accountable to the legislature and to the people directly. So the checks and balances are there. And if ministers are not taking actions, the civil society can put pressure through the Public Service Commission, through the Auditor General, through the Public Protector, to ensure that the pressure is mounted on the executive to ensure that civil servants are accountable and live by the constitutional values and principles which are enshrined in Chapter 10. And in terms of disclosures, it's in relation it's in line with the high standard of professional ethics, because public servants are supposed to live by that standard, not just a standard of professional ethics, but a high standard. And when they don't disclose their interests, they're already in violation of the Constitution and the law, and therefore we need to act. Also, the Code of Conduct obliges public servants to abide by the rule of law. They must implement the law to the letter. And if they don't disclose, that means they are in violation of the law. And the ministers and the MECs must act. And if they don't act, the legislature must act on the ministers to put pressure even on the president to ensure that ministers act accordingly.
All right, indeed, and I think we should follow up with those ministers, like you say, after I think 60 or 90 days. Thank you very much. Public Service Commission's Michael Seloane from the PSC there. We take a short break. We'll be